Hi, David.
Hey, Norland, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Let's talk about West a little bit and its involvement in Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I haven't seen West united this much. Maybe the last time it was, on my memory, it was 1989, after the Berlin Wall. It was, everybody united, this wind of change and, all that. Have you ever seen West united this much? And have you anticipated that this war will unite West or the Western Europe this much?
And if we go back to where my beliefs and what I thought was going to happen in February, to be honest, I never thought that Russia would invade Ukraine. I was very, very convinced up until about a week before the invasion that there's no way that Russia would ever cross. And then obviously, we see tanks rolling across on multiple fronts, into Russian tanks moving into Ukraine. And the entire world reacts, and it really did look like the West was coming together like it hasn't since. There's that, as you say. 1989 was this moment of euphoric joy for so many people, and there was triumphalism in a lot of ways. This is what we saw from February 24th, February 25th, and in the couple of weeks after that was certainly a collective reaction that I haven't seen. And I think that it even exceeded what we saw in 1989, what we saw in 1991, in terms of a sense of unity. But a lot of that unity seems to have been a lot of lip service from a lot of, if you look at the West, certainly, I think there was a lot of lip service that happened. NATO and the EU seemed to come together for about a month, and now we're seeing divisions, and we're seeing not cracks necessarily, but certainly divisions in terms of opinion and where they stand. And there's very much a fault line of where the former Soviet bloc was versus the original NATO members, the old school NATO members, Germany, France, less so the UK, but certainly the continental Western European NATO members. There's Italy. There's certainly a reluctance to freely and fully commit weapons, arms, and a lot of the trade embargo facets that need to happen to really isolate Russia, to really counter Russia in support of the Ukrainians. And there's a myriad of different reasons why I think all that's playing out, but this sense of Western unity lasted, I'd say, for probably about 3 to 4 weeks, and then has slowly seems to be fading away to more, as some countries are looking more at their national agenda and seeing a bit more of pragmatic approaches that they feel they need to take. Whether that's right or wrong, that's for the comment section to argue about, I guess.
We live in interesting and often challenging times, but instead of just sitting and doom scrolling, now is the time more than ever to create and build new positive habits in your life. That's why I am so glad to be working with the sponsor of today's video, Fabulous. Fabulous is the #1 self-care app that will help you build better habits and achieve your goals. The habit tracking approach lets you pick from over 100 new habits to develop, or even create your own through timely reminders and the use of behavioral science principles to make it a part of your routine. You can also use a dedicated programs approach to help you change your behavior at your own pace through a multi-week journey that the app helps you navigate. The small steps that Fabulous helps you take every day will lead to big and long-lasting changes, and Fabulous Premium lets you build and improve an unlimited number of habits through science-backed daily routines, so you will feel healthier, more productive, and more fulfilled. Start building your ideal daily routine. The first 100 people who click on the link will get 25% off a Fabulous subscription.
By the way, nice shirt. I can see the tractor and the turret of the tank.
So just a Ukrainian tractor taking away a tank it may have found in a field somewhere. So
that's really cool. Okay, so why West is helping Ukraine essentially? Do you think there is a bigger threat from the Russia side for the West if, let's say, Russia wins this war? Do you think Russia will try to capture some other part of the West or Europe?
I think there's very much a belief in the West that this is I'm not going to go, like, there's so many comparisons that get made to 1938 and 1939 that this is the line that needs to be drawn, and, you know, don't let it happen again, because it'll just keep, if you appease and it keeps happening and it gets worse. I'm not going to draw that comparison because the situations they're not the same. There's differences. There's similarities, but there's definitely differences there. People in the West want to put a check on what's perceived as Russian aggression. And that Russian aggression, I think in a lot of ways is very justified to see it that way from the 2008 Georgia, the actions in 2014 in Crimea and Luhansk and Donetsk still. There seems to be a trend and a pattern. Russian irredentism, I think that's the word that I got called out for not using actually a little while ago. Russian irredentism certainly seems to be very, very present in terms of Russian policy. There's a lot of countries out there that border on Russia that they feel that they've spent their time and they've done their time under the rule of Moscow, and they don't want any more. And they're agitating and looking for protection, for safety, for safeguarding in the future. And they're looking to the strongest other players that are out there. And that's either going to be the United States, NATO, Europe, like EU. Those aren't necessarily always on the same page. Alternately, they could be looking at China, depending where they are in the geopolitical globe, like where they show on the map. China's a whole other...
We'll talk about China.
China's a whole other host of challenges that come up. I think there's very good reasons to see Russian aggression as what it is, which is Russian aggression, Russian irredentism, that looking to put the empire back together and get the gang back together, firmly under the control of Moscow. Yeah, that's very much how I look at that. I think there's a lot of reasons the West wants to stop that. It's power politics. This is very, very much reminiscent to me of the great game in the 19th century, where it's the major players, not necessarily equals, but certainly trying to maneuver and outmaneuver each other on a map, and it doesn't matter who gets in the way.
West is helping Ukraine, giving weapons worth billions of dollars, but yet it's reluctant to participate in the war. Like they didn't even declare the non-fly zone over the Ukraine. So, and I keep hearing this word like the escalation, further escalation. What does that mean? Why the West is so reluctant to defend one of its allies?
To be clear, Ukraine isn't a formal ally for any countries any countries in the West. The Ukraine is a huge potential ally, but they're not a formal ally. For a lot of people in the West, Ukraine and Russia are synonymous. I mean, depending where the person, the spectator, might be sitting on the political sphere, or how they read history, how they view history, there's no difference between Ukraine and Russia. There's a huge and tremendous difference between Ukraine and Russia. We all know this, but there's people that want to ignore that. They want to deny that. Ukraine's never been a country. Well, anyways, without going into all of that, the Ukrainians have a fundamental right to exist. They have for 30 years, since 1991. Russia signed the paperwork and agreed to it. Why is the West reluctant to provide support? This fear of escalation, I think that's the exact word. Russia is still a nuclear power. Nobody knows how much of a nuclear power they actually are. There's always the distinct possibility that a lot of their nuclear hardware is perhaps not in a 100% functional state. Like if they turn the key, we want to use the word press the button. It's if the Russians turn the key, like how many of those weapons would actually function? Is it 100%? I will guarantee you it's not 100%, but if it's anything more than zero, like in terms of the weapons that actually fire, that's a major problem for the globe. Any kind of nuclear exchange is problematic, tactical, strategic, whatever. That's a huge problem. And that fear in the West is real. There's a real sense of tension. It's palpable. Nobody wants to risk a nuclear war of any type. There's a lot of people who don't think a nuclear war, that it would ever come to that. That's too people are too pragmatic, people are too realistic about the idea that a nuclear exchange really will end life as we know it. There's lots of people out there that think that it's worth running the risk. There's a whole slew, but there's a lot of influence and pressure from people who don't want to run that risk that the Russians have more than 0 functional nuclear weapons. That's, at the end of the day, I think that the Russian nuclear arsenal is a huge, huge piece of deterrence for the West to get directly involved. And no-fly zones, enforcement of a no-fly zone isn't just saying, hey, you can't fly your planes, because you've got to back that up. You got to put your money where your mouth is, and that's direct involvement. That's that escalation piece. There's economics that play into this as well. There's still countries in Western Europe that are buying Russian oil and gas because their economies run and are dependent on cheap Russian oil and gas. There's been promises to cut off and wean themselves off of those sources, but that's 8 months from now, 6 months from now, and in the meantime, that money is still being paid into the coffers of Moscow to help fund the war.
Time is on Ukraine's side. We keep hearing this, and that's because West keep providing help and aid to Ukraine, and volunteers, like the man resources that Ukraine has, is much bigger than Russia has. So does this make Russia's position more unsustainable?
I'm not sure if I would say that the Russian position is unsustainable as it stands right now. I think they're in a position. I think the Russians are in a position to, for the time being, to sustain and maintain their position. They're committing very large amounts of resources that they have into very, very slow advances in very limited sectors. I think the Russians have significant logistics issues. I think it was a couple of weeks ago we saw reports of old mothballed T-62s being pulled out of storage, and they're not going to end up being frontline combat. They're going to be used as reserve and whatnot. But the fact that the Russians are calling up 60-year-old tank chassis for any type of reason is indicative that they've got problems further up in their supply chain. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, they're taking heavy losses. There's absolutely no doubt, and they're slowly being pushed back as it stands right now. We're only I think today we're recording 101 days after the invasion. The Ukrainians are still going through recruit training. There's I think the estimate I saw was about 200,000 volunteer force recruits that are going through training. That's 200,000 trained troops that are going to come out with modern weapons and modern tactics and be able to be injected onto a narrow front that the Russians are having problems advancing on. The Ukrainians can also rely on incredibly, incredibly good intelligence gathering and intelligence sharing that's coming out of the West. All of these things together, the Ukrainians are working with counter battery fire now as they're integrating newer, longer range artillery pieces into their armed forces, into their tactical setups. And it's going to start causing the Russians a lot of problems. So we'll see. I think the Ukrainians, they've spent the last 101 days fighting for time. They've done an incredible job of doing that. And I think over the long, this backs up what I said a few weeks ago when we last had this type of conversation. I honestly think that we're going to see the Ukrainians start gaining an upper hand, provided that they can hang on for a bit more time.
When this war started, Russian propaganda said that we don't need West. Mr. Putin called West Empire of Lie, and they said that we have this great partner on the East, China. But from the looks of it, it's not the same. Like China cannot provide the same potency in relationship or the same trade partnership between Russia and China as West was providing. So what do you think? Can China be a reliable partner and take all this, the volume of the trade that Russia was doing with West?
Can it or will it? Chinese relations are, to me, are very interesting. China does what is best for China. Using the word partner is using the use of the word partner implies that there's a two-way relationship. Especially in this situation, I don't see that this, with China, I don't see this as any way of a two-way relationship, so much as China using the situation to get what it wants and what it needs and to gain leverage, but it's not going to risk its own position in global trade markets and in geopolitics for Russia, and less for Russia and say more for Putin. The Chinese are certainly buying large amounts still of oil and gas, which is feeding exactly what the Russians need, but they're not, as we're seeing right now, they're certainly not interested in arms transfers and anything like that. There was recently an announcement, I think, that the Chinese were barring flights of, I can't remember if it was Boeing and Airbus, or certainly at least Airbus, aircraft into Chinese airspace, which aligns with what the global, the call from the world. I can't remember which organization it is that's calling for it, but the Chinese are going along with it because they don't want to run afoul of what they need from the global airline industry. The Chinese are not stupid. Like, they're not the junior partner in that relationship. They're taking what they want from it, and they'll take what they need, what serves them best, and they're not going to go along with what doesn't and what jeopardizes what they need to operate as a partner with the rest of the globe, because they are a fully integrated, globalized partner.
So we see that West is trying to cut all the ties with Russia. So my question is, can Russia exist without the West? When I say exist, obviously there are countries that exist without any relationship with West, like North Korea. But when I say Russia, like this, all the work, all the effort that they did since 1990, like becoming the democratic country and all that. Is there any way to get back into that and be a good developed country without having any ties without West?
So that last qualification that you put in there is a good and developed country. I don't see that there's a way for them to do that second part. Can they exist on their own? Yeah, absolutely. They have trading partners. They have much smaller trading partners. But in a globalized economy, when you cut yourself, and we are in a globalized economy, as much as the word globalization seems to be an absolute hate word, like across the internet, we're a globalized economy. There's components and there's pieces for manufacturing that it doesn't make sense to make at home because it's too expensive. Okay, so you can start making that stuff at home domestically, but your cost per unit of everything goes way up. Can the Russians do it? Absolutely. Will they be building 100 pieces of, it's like, let's say an Su-57?
Or Moscovich?
Sure, yeah, exactly. Can they build it? Absolutely. Is it going to take them 6 times as long for 82 times the cost? Yeah, probably, but they can do it. This isn't a question of, to me, this isn't a question of can they do it. It's a question of what does it cost them to do it? What lasts longer? The Russian desire to go it alone and to do this and, return to the, North Korean style economy? Or, do the Russian people get fed up that, all they have is, what replaced McDonald's? Yadavanya or something? Yeah, not that McDonald's is the be all and end all. It's more of symbolic. I was actually really sad when I saw the McDonald's come down on Pushkin Square like that. I remember that McDonald's. I remember that opening. Really sad to see that go. Yeah, can they do it? Will they do it? Can they sustain it? These are all the questions, and that's the crystal ball. So,
thank you for your time, David. I think this was a good episode. So, guys, let us know in the comment section if you want us to cover some other topics related to this historic event.
We're living through history. It's interesting times. Ask me questions. I'll give you my opinion. Whether I'm right or wrong, come back and ask me again in 4 weeks.
All right. Thank you.